My name is Clara Whitfield, and I have been in a wheelchair since I was 9 years old. I want to tell you something I have never said out loud before. The accident didn't break me. The years that followed it did, slowly, quietly, the way water wears through stone. Not because of the chair, not because of the pain or the surgeries or the things I had to relearn. Because of the way my own family looked at me afterward. Like I was a problem they hadn't budgeted for. Like I was a line item that kept coming in overestimate, and the reasonable thing to do was redirect the funds. Last month, my parents sat across from me at a kitchen table. Not a lawyer's office, not a courtroom, just our own kitchen with the faucet that drips and the fluorescent light that hums. And my mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. Not when I came home from the hospital at 9 years old, pale and terrified, and still not fully understanding what forever meant. Not when I won the regional science competition at 14, navigating a gymnasium stage in my chair, while half the auditorium stood and the other half looked at their phones. Not even at my college graduation, when I crossed the stage and my father took a photo, and my mother cried in the way that people cry when they're relieved something difficult is over. She went white. Not pale, white, the color of paper, the color of a document you have just been handed that says everything you assumed was yours never belonged to you at all. My father looked at his hands. He could not look at me. Before I tell you what was in that document, I need to take you back. All the way back to a Tuesday morning in September, when I was 9 years old, and my life divided itself into before and after. I was 9 years old the morning my spine decided to stop cooperating. It wasn't a dramatic accident. There was no car crash, no fall from a height, no moment of obvious danger that everyone could look back on later and say, that's where it happened. That's the moment we should have prevented. It was a trampoline at a neighbor's birthday party on a warm September Saturday. Blue sky, music from a speaker on the back porch, 9-year-olds in 2-piece swimsuits eating cake with their hands. One wrong landing, a sound I can still hear if I let myself. Somewhere between a crack and a pop, deep inside my back, the kind of sound that belongs inside a body and not outside of it. And then nothing below my waist. Incomplete spinal cord injury, the doctors called it, T10 level. Which meant that some signals still moved through my nervous system, some didn't, and the map of what was possible, what might come back, what was gone permanently, what might be coaxed with enough therapy and enough time, would take years to fully draw. It took 3 years. By the time I was 11, the doctors stopped using words like recovery trajectory and started using words like adaptation and quality of life. My wheelchair stopped being a temporary measure and became simply the way I moved through the world. I remember the day I understood that it was permanent. I was 11. My physical therapist, a woman named Diane who had red hair and wore the same 3 cardigans in rotation, sat down across from me during a session and asked me how I felt about the chair. Like it's mine, I said. I don't know why I said that. I hadn't thought it before I said it. But the moment it was out, I knew it was true. Diane wrote something in her notebook and told me that was a healthy way to think about it. I think she was right. The chair was mine. It was the family around me that I couldn't quite figure out how to make mine anymore. My sister Brooke was 7 when the accident happened. She had my mother's eyes, wide-set, dark brown, the kind that look thoughtful even when the person behind them isn't thinking particularly hard. She had my father's confidence, the easy kind, the kind that comes from never having had a reason to doubt yourself. She was 7 and I was 9, and before the accident we had shared a bedroom and fought about the light being left on and argued over the remote control and built forts out of sofa cushions on rainy Sunday afternoons. After the accident, we stopped sharing the bedroom because I needed the one closer to the bathroom. That was practical. I understood that. Everything in those first months was practical, necessarily, and I was a practical child. I had always been a practical child. It is the kind of child you become when you understand, earlier than most, that the world will not rearrange itself on your behalf. My parents, Dennis and Beatrice Whitfield, were not cruel people. I want to say that clearly, and I want to mean it clearly, because the story I am about to tell you could be read as a story about villains, and that would be the wrong reading. They were frightened people. Frightened in the specific way that parents become frightened when something happens to their child that they cannot fix, cannot undo, cannot solve with money or effort or the right phone call to the right person. Frightened in the way that makes you work harder than you've ever worked, exhaust yourself completely, and then, somewhere in the second year, turn toward the thing that doesn't require that level of effort. The thing that is still whole. The thing that is still simple. That thing was Brooke. In the first year, everything in our house revolved around me. The home modifications, the ramp my father built himself on a Saturday in November, breathing hard in the cold, borrowing tools from the neighbor next door because the contractor had quoted a price they couldn't afford. The grab bars in the bathroom that he installed wrong the first time and had to redo. The bathroom tiles he ripped up at 11 at night because the ones he'd put down were too slippery for my chair wheels. The therapy appointments 3 times a week. The insurance appeals that my mother learned to write with the precision and persistence of a lawyer. The school meetings where she sat across from administrators and explained, in a voice that did not waver, exactly what accommodations I was legally entitled to. She fought for me. I need to say that too. In those first months she fought. My father built that ramp well. It is still there. That matters. But somewhere in the second year, the attention shifted. Not overnight. Not in any way that I could have pointed to on a Tuesday and said, today is when it changed. The way a river shifts. Gradually, almost invisibly. The kind of change that only becomes visible when you look back from a distance and realize the water is nowhere near where it used to be. Brooke was 9 by then. Old enough to have opinions, to need things, to take up space in the way that healthy walking children do, unself-consciously, completely, without apologizing for it. And my parents, exhausted from 2 years of medical paperwork and insurance negotiations, and learning an entirely new language that they had never asked to speak, turned toward her. She was easier. She required a different kind of energy, a familiar kind, the kind parents know how to give without thinking about it. I noticed it first in small things. Brooke's school play, when she was 10, had both parents in the front row with cameras. My therapy showcase, a small performance we did at the end of a summer session to show families what we'd been working on, had my mother and a video she texted to my father, who had a work thing he couldn't move. Brooke's birthday that year was 12 friends at the house, and a cake from the bakery on Elm Street with her name written in pink frosting. Mine was dinner at home, and a store-bought card with a $20 bill inside, which my mother gave me with the efficient energy of someone crossing an item off a list. I told myself it was logistics. My birthday was in February. February was always the worst month for my pain levels, and my parents knew that, and maybe a small dinner was kinder than a party I'd be miserable at. I told myself they were being practical. That's what families did, they were practical. I was very good at telling myself things. By 12, the shape of our family had become clear enough that I could no longer argue myself out of seeing it. I want to tell you what it actually felt like to live in that house. Not the facts of it, not the specific incidents, though I'll get to those too, but the texture of it. The way it felt on an ordinary Tuesday. Brooke had the larger bedroom. It had been redecorated the fall she turned 12, new paint in a soft sage green, a built-in desk her father had made from a YouTube tutorial, curtains with small yellow flowers that my mother ordered online, and stayed up late hemming to the right length. I heard the sewing machine going at 11:30 at night. I heard my mother humming while she worked. My room still had the carpet from when we moved in 8 years before, brown, thinning at the path from the door to the desk. The furniture was technically accessible, meaning nothing actively prevented me from using it, but nothing had been chosen with me in mind. The desk was 2 inches higher than comfortable for my chair. The bed required a transfer that worked but wasn't easy. I had adapted. I was very good at adapting. At dinner, the conversation moved toward Brooke the way a compass moves toward north. Her dance recital, her grades, which were good, genuinely good, and I don't want to minimize that. Her new friend Margaret, whose family had a lake house and had invited Brooke for a long weekend in July. My father listened with his whole face, the kind of listening where you lean forward slightly and your fork goes still. When I mentioned that I had placed second in the regional mathematics competition, second in the region, out of 46 students, my mother said, "That's great, sweetheart," and reached across the table for the salad bowl. Brooke said, "Math competitions sound really boring." My father laughed, a real laugh surprised out of him. I looked at my plate. I had been working on that competition for 6 weeks. I had done the extra practice sets at 11 at night with a flashlight because my overhead light made my eyes hurt in winter. Second in the region. I told myself, I will win first next year. I will keep winning until winning is the thing they talk about at dinner. It took me 2 more years to understand that the problem wasn't my wins. It was my presence. My presence required something from them, a recalibration of what normal looked like, a constant low-level effort of accommodation and adjustment. Brooke's presence required nothing. She fit the life they'd imagined without alteration. She was the house they thought they were building. I was the renovation they hadn't planned for. I understood this not with bitterness, but with the specific clarity of a child who had learned early to read the architecture of a family. I understood the structure. I just hadn't figured out yet what to do with the understanding. My grandfather, my mother's father, Raymond Oakes, was the person who noticed what was happening and decided to do something about it. Grandpa Raymond was a quiet man. Not withdrawn, not cold, quiet in the way that certain people carry their intelligence, like a tool they've learned to keep in their pocket until the moment it's needed. He was 71 when I was 12, retired from 30 years as a civil engineer, and he had hands that always smelled faintly of wood shavings because he spent his afternoons in the small workshop behind his house in Millhaven, 40 minutes away. The house in Millhaven was one he'd built himself in 1974, not hired to be built. Built. He had drawn the plans himself on graph paper at the kitchen table, pulled the permits from the county office in person, framed the walls on weekends over the course of 8 months with 2 friends and a borrowed truck. He used to say, "A man who can't build what he needs doesn't understand what he needs." He drove to our house every other Sunday. And every other Sunday, without fail, he would find me. Not in the living room where Brooke was usually demonstrating something for the adults. A dance she'd learned, a story from school, the particular performance that comes naturally to children who have learned they are the center of attention. Not at the dinner table where my parents were. He would find me in my room, or in the driveway, or on the back porch, wherever I had settled with a book or a project or just my own thoughts, and he would pull up a chair, not facing me, the way adults often sit when they want to talk at you, but beside me, turned the same direction as me, as if we were both looking at the same thing together, and he would ask me what I was working on. Not how I was feeling, not whether I needed anything, not whether I was keeping up at school, whether the chair was giving me trouble, whether I had friends, what I was working on. When I was 12, I was working on a scale model of the Millau Viaduct in France, the tallest bridge in the world, pylons that rise higher than the clouds on a low-visibility day, cable stays like the strings of an enormous harp. I'd been building it for 6 weeks from a kit I'd ordered with birthday money, modifying the design as I went because the kit's instructions were, in my assessment, structurally imprecise. Grandpa Raymond sat down beside me, studied the half-finished structure for a full minute without saying anything, and then said, "The cable tension on the right pylon is off by about 15 degrees. It'll throw the load distribution across the deck." I looked. He was right. I had been looking at it for days and hadn't seen it. We spent the next 2 hours fixing it together. He didn't fix it for me. He showed me how to think about it, the geometry of tension, the way forces distribute through a cable-stayed structure, the mathematics of balance that engineers live inside every day. He talked to me the way you talk to someone whose mind you respect, not a child, a colleague who happens to be 12. That was the year he started taking me to Millhaven on Saturdays. Not instead of his Sunday visits, in addition to them. Saturday mornings, he would pull into our driveway in his old Ford F-150, the one that had 200,000 miles on it and still ran because he maintained it himself. And I would load my chair into the bed, and he would help me into the passenger seat, and we would drive the 40 minutes to Millhaven while the radio played old country music he'd listen to without comment, and I'd read or watch the landscape go by. In the workshop behind his house, he taught me things. Not as lessons, not with the formal structure of instruction, the way school worked, but as conversation. He'd be working on something and I'd be beside him and he'd explain what he was doing and why, and I'd ask questions, and the questions would lead somewhere he hadn't planned to go, and we'd follow that thread until the afternoon light shifted and his neighbor's dog started barking for dinner. He told me about load-bearing structures and the difference between what a thing looks like it can hold and what it actually can. He told me about soil composition and why it matters where you build, why a beautiful piece of land can be a disaster if the ground underneath it won't hold weight. He told me about his father, who had come from Poland with almost nothing and built a carpentry business from zero through 30 years of patient, unglamorous work. His father's rule, he told me, was simple: don't build what you want. Build what will last. Want changes. Physics doesn't. And sometimes, sitting on the porch with glasses of iced tea while the yard went gold in the late afternoon, he told me things about our family that he said quietly, almost to himself, as if he was thinking out loud rather than delivering a lesson. "Clara," he said once, I was 13, and it was the summer the gap between Brooke and me had become something I could no longer talk myself out of seeing. Do you know the difference between what something is worth and what something costs? I thought about it the way he always made me think about things, actually, not reflexively. Not the same, I said. He nodded, looking at the yard. Your mother and father know what things cost. He paused for a long moment. I'm still working on teaching them what things are worth. I didn't know what he meant. I was 13. I thought he was being philosophical in the abstract way that old people sometimes were. He wasn't. He was being precise, the way engineers are precise. He was describing a problem he had already identified and was already in the process of solving. That same summer, he drove me to a place I had never been. It was 40 minutes past Millhaven, on a county road that turned from pavement to gravel about 3 miles in, the kind of road where you slow down and roll the windows up to keep the dust out. He drove it without hesitation, the way you drive a road you know well. The gravel wound through a stretch of woods, white pines and hardwoods, birches bright against the darker conifers, and then opened into a clearing, and in the clearing there was a house. Small, single-story, built low to the ground in the way of houses that understand weather, not built to impress, built to last. Wide doorways, a long porch across the front, and at the entrance a ramp so gently sloped that it looked like it had been part of the original design, like whoever drew the plans had always intended for people to arrive this way. I stared at it. Grandpa Raymond parked the truck and turned off the engine. He sat for a moment with his hands in his lap. Then he said, I built this the year after your accident. Took me 2 years. I built it for someone who might need it. He looked at me. He said, I need you to understand something, Clara. What you can do in this world has nothing to do with what your legs can do. But where you can do it, that's something I can plan for. That's something I can build. He reached into his shirt pocket and held out a key. Brass, ordinary on a plain ring. A spare, he said, in case you ever need to get in when I'm not here. The front door opens with 6 inches of clearance on either side. I checked the ADA specifications and then added 2 more inches because specifications are the floor, not the ceiling. Below my chair, when I rolled toward the house to look at it more closely, the gravel was packed flat and perfectly level, the stones small and even. He'd done that too. Of course he had. I held the key. I looked at the house. I thought, he loves me. I did not yet think. This is a legal instrument. I did not yet understand that the key in my hand was the last piece of a plan he had set in motion 3 years earlier, in an attorney's office in Millhaven, on a Monday afternoon after he had spent a year watching my family operate, and decided that watching was no longer sufficient. I was 13. I thought it was a gift from a grandfather who saw me. It was that. It was also something larger, something I wouldn't fully understand for another 5 years. I put the key on my keyring that afternoon, next to the key to our house. I carried both for 5 years. I never told my parents about the second one. Between 13 and 17, the gap between Brooke and me grew into something with its own gravity, its own rules, its own language. The first language was money. When Brooke turned 13, my parents enrolled her in a private academy across town. The kind of school with a crest on the uniform and a waiting list, and a college counseling office that started working with students in 8th grade. It cost $4,200 a semester. I know the exact number because I heard them discuss it at the kitchen table 3 nights before they told Brooke, not us, just Brooke, and my mother said the word, investment, 4 times in 12 minutes. I was in the public school. I had been there since the year after my accident, when my parents and the district had worked out an accommodation plan. The school had an elevator that worked most of the time, a bathroom on the 2nd floor with a door that didn't latch from the inside. I'd learned to wedge my chair against it, and a science lab with lab tables that were 6 inches too high for comfortable wheelchair access. I had adapted. The school was not inaccessible, exactly. It simply had not been designed with me in mind, and no one had done the work to redesign it. I had a 4.1 GPA. I had academic awards. I had a science fair ribbon that had spent a year in my backpack because I couldn't find a good place to put it. Nobody talked about my window. I was not a future that needed investing in. I was a present that needed managing. When Brooke turned 15, she wanted her bedroom redone. Not just repainted, completely renovated. New flooring, a built-in desk unit, a window seat with storage underneath. My father hired a contractor and the project took 3 weeks, and when it was finished, my mother photographed it for the social media account she kept of our house, the one she posted on occasionally with captions about home and family and the small things that make a life. My room still had the carpet from the previous owners. Brown, wearing thin. The year before I had asked, carefully, if we might look into adjustable height furniture. There are companies that make desks and kitchen items specifically for wheelchair users. The adjustment is not complicated, and my mother had said she'd look into it when things settled down. Things settled into a shape. The shape did not include adjustable furniture for me. I stopped asking. This is the thing I want you to understand about being overlooked in a family that is not cruel. You don't stop asking because you're forbidden to ask. You stop asking because you learn, through accumulation of small evidence, that the asking changes nothing except the temperature in the room. It makes your mother's expression go patient and careful. It makes your father look at something across the room. The request is received, processed, and filed somewhere it will never be retrieved from. So you stop sending requests. You stop expending the energy. You make do. I was good at making do. When I was 15, Brooke got a car for her birthday. Used, but reliable, a silver sedan with low miles and a bow on it in the driveway. I remember standing at the front window watching her run outside, and my parents watching her with the expressions of people who have given a gift that landed exactly right. When I turned 16, my mother gave me a new pressure relief cushion for my wheelchair. It was the medically correct choice. She had researched it, ordered the right model, wrapped it in tissue paper. I thanked her. I meant the thanks, it was thoughtful in its way. But I held both images side by side and tried to be fair and found I couldn't quite close the distance between them. That same year, I asked about adaptive driving lessons. There are programs specifically for people with spinal cord injuries at my level, modified vehicles with hand controls, specialized instructors, a pathway to an actual license. It exists. It's possible. I had researched it thoroughly. My father looked up the cost online while I was still in the room. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let's revisit this when Brooke is settled with school." Brooke was 13. She was not going to be settled with school for at least 5 years. I said, "Okay." He said, "It's not a no, just timing." I said, "I understand." I did understand. I understood perfectly. The timing would never arrive. There would always be something else for the money, always another reason, always another year to wait. I understood, and I closed the door on that particular wanting, and I did not open it again. I went to my room that night and I sat in the dark, and I thought about my grandfather's voice saying, "You're not invisible to everyone, Clara." I was 16, and I finally understood what he'd meant. He meant, "I see you." He meant, "I have been watching." He meant, "I am doing something about it." 2 months after my birthday, he drove me to Millhaven on a Saturday morning and took me to a small office above a dry-cleaning shop on Main Street. The stairs had a lift, a simple mechanical platform on a track along one wall. He'd called ahead and confirmed it. Helen Marsh was in her mid-60s, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and a desk that was organized with the precision of someone who had spent 4 decades finding things that other people had lost. Her office smelled like old paper and something warm, tea, maybe, or the particular smell of a room that has held serious conversations for a long time. She stood when we came in. She offered her hand to me first. She was a property attorney, she told me, specializing in trust structures and estate planning. She had been working with my grandfather for 4 years. "Your grandfather," she said, "is a thorough man. He doesn't like structures without proper load-bearing walls." She smiled slightly. He'd clearly used that phrase with her before. Over the next hour, she explained what my grandfather had done. 4 years earlier, when I was 10 years old and had been home from the hospital for about a year, Raymond Oakes had come to her office on a Monday afternoon. He told her what he'd observed about my family. He told her what he wanted to do about it. He told her he needed it done correctly, quietly, and permanently, with no room for it to be undone later, not by him, not by my parents, not by anyone. He had established an irrevocable special needs trust, the Oakes Whitfield Special Needs Trust, named in the county records. Helen was the trustee. I was the sole beneficiary. The house in the clearing on the county road, the one he'd shown me that summer, the one with the ramp and the wide doorways and the gravel he'd packed himself, had been transferred into the trust 2 years earlier, the month it was completed. The deed was registered. The transfer was recorded at the county. It had not been in Raymond Oakes' personal estate for 4 years. Adjacent to the house, 4 acres of land bordering a creek, purchased separately and transferred into the trust the following spring. A savings account, 30 years of quiet deposits, the money of a man who drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it because he had no interest in impressing anyone. The current balance was just over $400,000. Invested conservatively according to instructions he'd given Helen at the time of the trust's creation. His life insurance policy, the beneficiary had been changed to the trust 3 years before. The payout, when it came, would go directly into the trust. I sat in the chair across from Helen Marsh and felt the room reorganize itself around me, the way it does when information changes the shape of everything. "The house," I said, "the one he showed me when I was 13. "He'd already transferred it before he showed it to you," Helen confirmed. "He wanted you to know what it was. He wanted you to have the key and understand what the key was for, but he didn't want to explain the full structure until you were older." "Why not?" I asked. My grandfather answered, "Because knowledge is a weight, Clara. I didn't want you carrying it before you were strong enough. And because," he paused, choosing the words with the care he always brought to important things, "if your parents had known about this structure earlier, they would have had years to look for ways around it. The trust is irrevocable. That means I cannot dissolve it, and neither can anyone else. But knowledge of its existence would have given them time to consult attorneys, to challenge my competency, to create complications. I didn't want complications. I wanted it clean. Helen slid a document across the desk. She tapped a line near the bottom. A special needs trust like this one is designed specifically, she said, so that the assets inside it do not count toward eligibility calculations for government disability benefits. The trust protects your inheritance without displacing the other protections you're entitled to by law. Your grandfather asked me about this specifically at our very first meeting. He wanted you to have both. He wanted me to have both. I looked at him. He was looking at the window, calm, the way he was always calm. Not the calm of a man who doesn't feel things, but the calm of a man who has done what needed doing and trusts the structure he built to hold. I will hold that moment for the rest of my life. There is one more thing you need to know, Helen said. Her voice shifted slightly, becoming careful in a way it hadn't been before. Your grandfather is going to ask you to keep this between the two of you, and between you and me for the time being. He believes, and I agree with him, that telling your parents now would create conflict that serves no one. When you turn 18, you become the legal adult beneficiary of the trust with full authority over its assets. At that point, you'll tell them, or you won't. That will be your choice. She looked at me, but until then it stays here. My grandfather turned from the window and looked at me directly. Promise me, he said. I promised. That drive back from Millhaven, 40 minutes on a state highway with the radio playing and the windows cracked to let in the cool spring air, I held the key in my closed fist for most of the trip. The same key I'd been carrying for 3 years. I looked at it differently now. It wasn't just a key to a house. It was a key to a plan that had been in motion since I was 10 years old. A plan built by a man who understood load-bearing walls. Before I go on, I have to ask you something. Have you ever had someone plan for your future so quietly, so completely without your knowing, that you didn't realize you'd been caught until you were already safe? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and the time it is where you are. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Hit the bell. These stories take a long time to build, and knowing you're here makes it worth every minute. Now let me tell you what the next 2 years looked like. I kept the promise for 2 years. Those 2 years were some of the quietest of my life, and some of the hardest. Quiet because I had stopped asking for things, stopped expecting to be seen in certain ways, stopped spending energy on wanting what I'd understood I was not going to get. There is a kind of peace in that. Not a happy peace, more the peace of a person who has stopped swimming against a current and started watching the river instead. Hard because watching is its own particular kind of pain. Brooke turned 17 that second year, and my parents began talking about her college applications the way other families talk about a wedding. With the excitement and the spreadsheets and the long-term investment energy that I had spent years understanding was not being directed my way. They hired a college counselor at $400 a session, a woman named Mrs. Fenwick who wore blazers and had strong opinions about application essay structure. I heard her voice coming from the kitchen on Tuesday evenings when I was doing homework in my room, the steady rise and fall of advice being given and received. I had started looking at 4-year schools on my own, not to share with my parents. I'd moved past the stage of expecting their input on my plans, but for myself, quietly, building a list of programs and accessibility ratings and campus geography in a notebook I kept in my desk drawer. Environmental engineering had been a quiet passion of mine since I was 14, since a class project on watershed management that I'd become so absorbed in that I'd done 3 times the required research and received, for my trouble, a grade of A and a teacher's note that said impressive depth. The programs I was looking at were at 4-year universities, good ones. I didn't share the notebook with my parents. The Saturdays in Millhaven continued. Grandpa Raymond's health had slowed in the way of a machine that is fundamentally sound, but operating with less reserve than it used to have. We no longer spent Saturday afternoons in the workshop as much. His energy for sustained physical work had reduced, but we still sat on the porch, and we still talked, and he still asked me what I was working on. I was working on a robotics project that I'd been building in the workshop at the county roadhouse, which he'd given me full access to by then. I would drive out there on some Saturday mornings before going to Millhaven, let myself in with the key, spend an hour or two at the workbench, then lock up and drive to his house. It was my space. I had arranged it the way I wanted, the workbench at the right height, the tool storage low enough to reach from my chair, the floor clear and even. He had built it all at exactly the right dimensions. He'd thought of it before I had. My parents didn't ask where I went on Saturdays. They were busy with Brooke's college process. When I was 17, 2 things happened in the same month that changed the shape of everything. The first was a conversation with my mother. She sat down beside me on the couch on a Sunday evening while my father was in the garage and Brooke was upstairs on a video call. She had her thoughtful voice, the one that was slightly lower than her normal register, the one she used for conversations she had prepared for. She had the energy of someone about to do something kind. "Clara," she said, "you're almost 18, and I've been thinking about your future. Your dad and I both have." I waited. She said, "There are some really good programs out there for young people in your situation. We looked into some assisted living communities. Some of them are absolutely lovely now. They're not what they used to be. They have social activities and support staff and—" "I'm planning to go to college," I said. "Of course," she said quickly. "Absolutely, community college, there are great programs." "4-year college," I said. "Environmental engineering." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We can look into what's available." She didn't say, "Of course we'll support that." She didn't say, "Where are you applying? Let's get you a college counselor." She said, "We can look into what's available." The language of people who intend to do nothing. I thought about the house on the county road, about Helen Marsh's desk with the organized files, about the savings account with $400,000 in it. I said, "I'll think about it." She patted my hand. She said, "We just want what's best for you." I didn't say what I was thinking. I was very good at not saying what I was thinking. The second thing that happened that month was that Grandpa Raymond had his second cardiac event. His neighbor called my mother on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at school. By the time I got home, the situation had been assessed and managed. He was stable, in the hospital in Millhaven, expected to recover. My mother told me at dinner with the tone she used for delivering difficult information that was ultimately okay. "He's going to be fine. He just needs rest." He was not fine in the way she meant it. He was alive, and for a time he was stable, but something had shifted. When I drove to Millhaven the Saturday after he came home from the hospital, his neighbor let me in through the side door. He was in his reading chair by the window with a wool blanket across his lap, which I had never seen before, the blanket. He'd always run warm. Outside was a clear October afternoon. He looked smaller. That's the word. Not thinner, not frailer in any specific measurable way, smaller, the way certain people look after a hospital, as if something has been redistributed in the night. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He said, "Helen has everything. You know what to do when the time comes." "I know," I said. He said, "Planning is not pessimism. Planning is respect for the future." I drove home that afternoon with both hands on the wheel of the adapted van I'd been learning to operate. On a learner's permit, I'd gotten with money from my savings. Through a program I'd found myself, without telling my parents, because I'd learned that their response to my plans was always some form of not yet or let's see. I drove home, and I thought about a man who built a house with 2 inches more clearance than code required, because he knew that specifications are the floor, not the ceiling. He died 4 months later. A Wednesday morning in early February, 4 days before my 17th birthday. His neighbor found him in the reading chair by the window. It looked like he had fallen asleep. The neighbor said later that his hands were folded in his lap. My mother came to my bedroom door that afternoon, and she told me, and her face was sad, genuinely sad. She had loved her father, whatever else was true, and also, under the sadness, already beginning to arrange. I could see it in the slight tension around her eyes. The look of someone whose mind is running 2 tracks simultaneously. I grieved him in private. Real grief, the kind that has no performance in it, doesn't announce itself. It arrives sideways, in the smell of wood shavings in a hardware store, in the sound of a truck engine on a quiet street, in the particular weight of a key in your hand. I texted Helen Marsh 2 words the evening of the day he died. He's gone. She replied in 3 minutes. I know, I'm so sorry, Clara, I'll be in touch. Stay the course. My parents drove to Millhaven the following week to meet with Raymond's estate lawyer, a different attorney, the one who handled his general personal affairs, the small parcel of land he'd held in his own name, his bank account, his truck. My father came home with the energy of a man who has discovered a possibility. He said at dinner that Raymond's estate had some assets that would take time to sort out. He said there might be some property. He said it the way you say something you're trying not to say out loud in front of the wrong person. I watched his face carefully. He was already calculating. He didn't know about Helen. He didn't know about the trust. He didn't know about the house on the county road or the 4 acres or the savings account with 30 years of patience accumulating in it. I said nothing. I went upstairs and sat on my bed and thought, 3 more months. 3 more months until I turned 18. 3 more months until I was a legal adult with full authority over a trust I had been the beneficiary of since I was 10 years old. I could do 3 more months. 3 months before my birthday, my father tried harder. He came into the kitchen one Sunday afternoon while I was at the table with my college notebook open, the 4-year programs, the accessibility ratings, the application deadlines I'd been tracking since fall. He sat across from me. He had the expression of a man who has been building to something. Raymond had some property out past Millhaven, he said. I've been doing some research. There's a parcel registered in his name, a small piece, mostly land. But our realtor thinks there might be more out there. An old house, maybe, on a county road somewhere. You spent a lot of time with him. Did he ever show you anything like that? I closed the notebook. I kept my voice completely even. He took me to a lot of places out there over the years, I said. I don't remember the details well. Roads all look similar. My father nodded, looking at me. He said, if there is a house, it would come to your mother as next of kin. We could sell it. Help with Brooke's school. Maybe set something up for you too, a fund for your living expenses. Make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of. He said it the way people say it when they mean contained, when they mean managed, when they mean, you don't need to want things because we've handled the wanting on your behalf. I said, that sounds fair. I'll try to remember if he mentioned anything specific. He went back to his phone satisfied. He thought he'd planted a seed. He had no idea what was already growing. My mother tried 2 weeks later. She came to my room in the evening, sat on the edge of my bed, and said with her reasonable voice that they'd confirmed a parcel in Raymond's name, that the estate process was moving forward, that she wanted me to know they intended to use whatever came from it for the family's benefit. For everyone, she said. I said, okay, Mom, I trust you to handle it. She looked at me for a long moment. I gave her nothing to read. Here is what she didn't know. The parcel my father had found registered in Raymond Oak's personal name was a small separate piece of land, worth approximately $20,000, that he had intentionally left in his estate to give my parents something to find. Something that would satisfy their search. Something that would make them think they had the full picture when they had a corner of it. The house on the county road, the 4 acres, the savings account, the life insurance payout. None of it was in Raymond Oak's name, it was in the trust, recorded, irrevocable, mine. My parents had found what he'd left them to find. They thought that was all there was. 6 weeks before my birthday, Helen called. "It's time to start preparing," she said. "When you turn 18, I'll need you to come to the office and formally accept the trust. Sign the documentation that establishes you as the adult beneficiary with full authority. Once you've signed, I'll file a notice of trust with the county that will make the full record public. Anyone who searches the property records will find it immediately after that." "And before I sign," I said, "if my father searches the county records for the house?" "He would find the trust," she said. "It's been there for 6 years. He simply hasn't searched specifically for that parcel. He's been looking at what was in your grandfather's estate. The house was never in your grandfather's estate. It was transferred before he died." I said, "He'll look harder when he realizes the small parcel isn't what he expected." Helen said, "Then we make sure you sign before he looks harder." She paused. "Your grandfather was a precise man, Clara. He anticipated this. That's why the timing matters." I said, "I'll be there on my birthday." She said, "I know you will." Have you ever known something that someone else desperately wanted to know and had to stay quiet about it? Not from cruelty, not from revenge, just because the timing wasn't right yet, and some things need to land at the right moment to land cleanly. Tell me in the comments. I want to know your stories. And if this is resonating with you, if you've ever been the person in the room that everyone looked through instead of at, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Now let me tell you about the morning I turned 18. I turned 18 on a Wednesday in February. 4 days before, I had driven to the county roadhouse for the last time as a minor. I sat on the porch in the February cold with a blanket across my lap, and I looked at the creek that ran along the edge of the property, iced over at the edges, moving dark and slow in the center. The pines along the bank were heavy with old snow. The air smelled like cold metal and wood smoke from somewhere distant. I had the key in my hand. I thought about a Saturday in summer when I was 13, and a truck pulling into a clearing, and a man turning off the engine and sitting very still for a moment before he spoke. I thought about the gravel packed flat and even below my wheels. I thought about a door with 6 inches of clearance on either side, because specifications are the floor, not the ceiling. I sat there until my hands were cold. Then I went inside, made tea in the kitchen at the counter that was exactly the right height, and sat at the table that I had been working at for 5 years, and I felt something settle into place inside me. Like a last piece of framing going in, like the structure reaching completion. I drove to Helen's office the morning of my birthday alone. I told my parents I had an errand. They were occupied. Brooke had an early decision acceptance letter coming that week, and the house had the specific tension of people waiting for news that will change things. Helen's office was the same as always. Old paper and warm tea and the particular quiet of a room where important things get done without ceremony. She stood when I came in and she said, "Happy birthday, Clara." We spent 2 hours going through every document. The trust deed. The property transfer records showing the house moved into the trust 6 years before my grandfather's death, when he was fully competent, and the transfer was witnessed and notarized by 2 separate people. The investment account statements showing $412,000, conservatively managed and steadily grown. The life insurance assignment. The 4-acre land parcel. Total value of the trust assets, $940,000. I held that number in my chest for a long moment. Helen said, "Your grandfather didn't spend money he didn't need to spend. He drove the same truck for 22 years. He wore the same winter coat for 15. He believed that money was patience made visible, and he was very patient." At the bottom of the document stack was an envelope. My name on the front in his handwriting, the precise, slightly slanted engineer's hand I had known since I was 12. "He left this for you," Helen said, "to be read after you sign." I signed first, Every page, every line, every initial. Then I picked up the envelope. It was one page. Written in blue ink, the letters getting slightly larger, toward the bottom the way his writing did when he was tired, or when he was writing something that mattered. He wrote, Clara, if you are reading this, you are 18, and Helen has explained what I have done. I want to tell you why I did it the way I did it. He wrote, I watched your family carefully for the years after your accident. I watched the way a household allocates its resources. Not just money, but attention, energy, time, the things that don't show up in a bank statement. I watched you become invisible in a family that was not trying to make you invisible. They were simply afraid, and fear makes people small, and small people take the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance did not run through your room. He wrote, I did not build the house on the county road as a statement or as a protest. I built it because you need a place that is yours, built for the specific way you move through the world, built at the right height, with the right clearances, by someone who measured twice and built once. A place that cannot be sold out from under you. A place that no one can use as leverage against you. A house is a load-bearing wall. You have deserved one since the day you came home from that hospital at 9 years old and showed me what it looked like to adapt without complaint. He wrote, I'm not angry at your parents. I need you to know that. Greg is a frightened man who loves his family imperfectly. Your mother is a woman who learned to choose what was easy and told herself it was practical. I have been their father and I know them. I am not angry. I am disappointed in the choices they made, but disappointment is not anger, and I do not want you carrying my disappointment into your relationship with them. That is theirs to reckon with, not yours to carry. The last line, you were never invisible to me, Clara. You were the one I was watching the whole time. Build something extraordinary with what I've left you. I know you will. You already have. I folded the letter. I held it for a long time. Outside, Helen's window looked onto the street where an ordinary Wednesday morning was proceeding without event. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, the specific unremarkable motion of a town going about its business on a cold February day. I drove home through streets that looked exactly the same as they had that morning and felt completely different to me. Safe. That was the word for it. For the first time in 9 years, in the specific way that I needed to feel it, I felt safe. I did not tell my parents that day. I went home, I ate dinner, I listened to the conversation about Brooke's acceptance letter. She had gotten in, early decision, full tuition at the Vermont school, and the dinner table had the electric warmth of a celebration, and I said the right things and I went to bed. I waited 11 days. On a Sunday, my father brought it up again at the kitchen table. He said Raymond's estate was now fully processed. The small parcel was in my mother's name. They'd been in touch with a realtor. He said, I think there might be more out there, though. A structure of some kind. Our realtor mentioned the parcel number might be associated with adjacent land. Clara, did Raymond ever take you anywhere specific out past Millhaven? A house. I set down my fork. He showed me a house once, I said, on the county road. He showed it to me when I was 13. I have the address. My father went still. Where? I told him. He wrote it down. He called his realtor that evening. I heard him from the hall. I let him make the call. I let 2 days pass while he made inquiries, called the county records office, waited for callbacks. I watched him and my mother at dinner move through those 2 days with a slightly heightened energy, the energy of people who can see something they want getting closer. On the 3rd day, the realtor called back while my father was at the kitchen table, and I was in the doorway getting a glass of water. I watched his face change. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in stages, the way comprehension arrives when it is unwelcome. First the information, then the processing, then the understanding of what the information means. I watched all 3 stages cross his face in about 30 seconds. The realtor had found the property records. The house on the county road and the 4 adjacent acres had been transferred out of Raymond Oak's personal ownership 6 years ago. The current records showed the property held under the Oaks Whitfield Special Needs Trust irrevocable, established and recorded at the county. Trustee, Helen Marsh, attorney at law. Sole beneficiary, Clara Whitfield. My father put down the phone. He looked at me, not through me, at me, fully in a way that had the weight of 9 years behind it. I said quietly, "Grandpa built that house for me. He put it in a trust 6 years before he died. It can't be sold. It can't be transferred. There's nothing to contest." My mother came in from the living room. She looked at my father's face and then at mine. My father told her what the realtor had said. She looked at me. She said, "Clara, we're your parents." "I know," I said. She said, "We have been doing everything we could for this family." "I know," I said. My father said, "That property, the value of it, we could have used that. You know how much we've had to manage. Brooke's school, the house, your medical expenses for years." I waited for him to stop. Then I said, "The trust is irrevocable, Dad. It was established when Grandpa was fully competent, witnessed by 2 people, notarized and recorded at the county 6 years ago. I've spoken to Helen Marsh. There is nothing to contest, and attempting to contest it would cost more in legal fees than the property is worth." He made sure of that. That was intentional. My father looked at me the way he had not looked at me since before the accident. Not past me, not through me, at who I had become while he wasn't watching. My mother sat down at the table. She pressed her palms flat on the surface, the gesture she made when she was trying to hold something steady. She said, in a voice that was tired rather than angry, "Why didn't he tell us? Why didn't Raymond tell us any of this?" I reached into the pocket of my jacket. I had the letter with me. I had carried it every day since I'd read it, folded to the same crease lines. "He wrote something about that," I said. I handed it across the table. She read it. Her expression changed while she read, not a single dramatic shift, but a series of smaller ones, like weather moving across a landscape. My father read over her shoulder. When they finished, neither of them said anything for a long time. The faucet dripped. Once, the refrigerator hummed. My father sat down. That was 3 months ago. My father called Helen Marsh's office once, the following week. She told me about the call later. He asked about contesting the trust. She told him what it would cost, what the process would involve, and what the realistic outcome was, which was that an irrevocable trust established by a mentally competent grantor, witnessed, notarized, and recorded 6 years before his death, with no evidence of coercion or diminished capacity, had essentially no viable legal challenge. He thanked her and did not call again. The conversations that followed in our house were not easy. I want to be honest about that. There was a week where my parents barely spoke to me, not out of anger exactly, but out of something more complicated. The disorientation of people who have discovered that a story they were telling themselves about their own family was missing an entire chapter, and the chapter changed the meaning of everything that came before it. My mother came to find me on the back porch one evening in early April. She sat in the chair beside me and looked at the yard for a while without speaking. Then she said, "I don't know when I stopped seeing you. I've been thinking about it. I can identify some of the decision points looking back, but at the time they each felt small. They each felt like the reasonable thing." I said, "I know." She said, "That's what I'm most ashamed of, actually, that each one felt reasonable." I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't okay, and she didn't need me to tell her it was. She needed to sit with it. I let her. I started university in March, spring enrollment, environmental engineering, at a school 3 states away with the best adaptive campus I'd found in my research. The one I'd been tracking in my notebook for 2 years. A 4-year program, fully accessible, a department that had taken the accessibility ratings seriously enough to redesign several of its lab spaces the year before I applied. I moved into the house on the county road on a Saturday in late February. The last snow of winter was still on the ground in patches beneath the pines. I unlocked the front door, the door with 6 inches of clearance on either side, And I rolled through into the kitchen with the counters at exactly the right height, built by a man with a measuring tape and 30 years of understanding what precision means. I sat on the porch that first evening and watched the creek, dark water moving slowly under a late winter sky. The same creek I had been looking at since I was 13, from this exact porch, from a chair my grandfather had always made sure had room beside it. Brooke called me in March. First time she had called me just to call since we were children sharing a bedroom and fighting about the light. She asked if she could come visit sometime. She said, "I've been thinking about a lot of things, about our family, about what I didn't know." I said, "Come whenever you want." She came in April, on a Sunday, with a grocery bag and her old oversized sweater, and we sat on the porch with coffee and talked for 4 hours. Not about the trust or the property or my parents, about everything else. About the heron that visits the creek on weekend mornings. About her first year at university, which was harder than she'd expected in ways she hadn't anticipated. About our grandmother, my mother's mother, who we both remembered as someone who smelled like lavender and could do a crossword in pen. It was the first afternoon in years that felt like having a sister. My parents and I are speaking. Not easily, not yet in the way that feels natural, but with the effort that people make when they have decided the relationship is worth the difficulty of rebuilding it. My father came to see the house in March. He stood on the porch and looked at the creek and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "He built this well." I said, "He built everything well." My father nodded, slowly, the nod of someone absorbing something that is going to take time to fully absorb. My father built me a ramp once in November in the cold with borrowed tools when I first came home from the hospital. He built it well. It is still there. I hold that fact alongside everything else because a person is not one thing and a family is not one story, and learning to hold the complexity of both at once is, I think, what adulthood actually is. I want to leave you with the last thing my grandfather said to me, the final Saturday I visited him in Millhaven, when he was in his chair by the window with the blanket across his lap, and the October light coming in sideways through the glass. He said, "Most people spend their lives trying to be seen. You have been spending yours learning to see clearly. That is rarer. Don't trade it." I think about those words often. If you are listening to this, and you feel like the resources in your family have never quite pointed in your direction, if you have spent years learning to make do, learning to stop asking, learning to adapt without acknowledgement, I want you to hear me. Being overlooked is not a verdict. It is a weather pattern. And somewhere, sometimes, someone who loves you has been building something you don't know about yet. Built at the right height with the right clearances by someone who checked the specifications and then added 2 more inches because specifications are the floor, not the ceiling. My grandfather could not make my parents into different people. He could not change what they chose or undo what they failed to do. He could not make me visible in the house I grew up in, or give me back the driving lessons I never got, or put my ribbon on the refrigerator instead of in my backpack. But he could build the ground beneath my feet, and he did. Quietly over 6 years, without telling anyone, with the patience and precision of a man who had spent 30 years building things that were meant to last. That is the difference between what something costs and what something is worth. That is my grandfather, Raymond Oakes. That is my story. If this reached you, if it made you feel something real, if it made you feel less alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I would be so glad to have you here for the next one. I'll see you soon.